You're listening to Interchain FM, the Cosmos radio station. If you're seeking alpha in the cosmos, look no further. I'm your host, Django and Chain. Today I'm here with Stanford and Zon from Initia, one of the most highly anticipated app chains to come to the cosmos in 2024. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
How did you get into Cosmos? How did you start working on Initia?
Yeah, sure. So originally I was actually a quant trader. Got involved in crypto, so like the trading side of things. I wanted to get more involved in the ecosystem. Actually joined Terra fairly early on through an introduction of a friend. That's where I met Zon. We ended up basically spinning out to build our own Cosmos project, and then we kind of like morphed it to what it is today.
I first got into crypto when my brother bought me a ledger during COVID summer. He was fiddling around with DeFi summer, and I wanted to play as well. You know, I farmed the yams.
Nice, you're a yam farmer.
Sold the pickles.
Pickles.
Had a great time on Ethereum. At the same time, I was finishing up my master's degree in computer science, and I was interested in joining crypto from a builder's perspective. I had done plenty of jobs as a software engineer in Web2 land, but they weren't entirely fun. I think one of the best value propositions of working in crypto is that it's just entertaining.
Why wasn't Web2 land fun?
I think when I worked at a startup, it was because you have to drive, you get to do all sorts of different hats. You get to help with marketing and BD and engineering. And I was joining a relatively mid-sized company.
Being like a couple hundred people?
Yeah, a couple hundred. I knew the work that I would be doing was like help iterate on some back-end systems or build a little widget, and I wanted to do something that's more in the eyes of people. I think it's a lot of fun when you can interact with your customers immediately. And in crypto, like when you build something, you get immediate feedback. Right? Everything you built just comes out into the public instantly, and you can try and see what works and what doesn't, and you get to interact with your users. So I started looking into building inside the system. I found the Cosmos ecosystem.
How did you go from DeFi summer yam farmer to Cosmos?
So Mirror on Terra
Yes.
was an excellent farm.
Right.
Because I was coming from Web2 and there was all this Wall Street bet stuff going on. I was like, hey, I can still own Microsoft and also farm these Mirror tokens. And they're paying me a bunch of yield, so it sucked me in.
Yeah.
I started looking into this app chain thesis. That was pretty interesting that you can vertically integrate what you're trying to build into your entire blockchain. And then using a shared underlying infrastructure, you have interoperability, bridging, a lot of those things. And so I DM'd Do Kwon on Twitter, and I said, yo, let me be an intern as a software engineer. I'm pretty capable. I published a few smart contracts. I didn't know how to build in Rust, but they're not too hard. Started as a software engineer, or a smart contract developer at Terra. And worked there. Yep, Cosmos. Still don't know any Go, but Cosmos ain't too bad.
Yeah. Someone else was a...
Exactly, someone can do that. Was there for a while, helped build some dApps, was loaned out to the ecosystem to help a lot of teams build what they're building. And then this guy was working on a project and asked me to help build some of the smart contract stuff for him.
Oh, so you're the SDK engineer.
No, I was the PM of the project, one of some of the internal projects that we were working on that we were interested in. So like some of the, back before when Cosmos didn't really have that much like DeFi infrastructure, we were interested in building some of these different types of swaps, concentrated liquidity, like just some of the early days of a lot of these projects. So I thought like, he's interested, he's like a yam farmer, thought he'd be a good addition to basically what we were trying to do.
So we became buddies, and then we were like, market's good, let's go build our own project.
And when was that?
This was in February 2022.
So that was actually before the Luna JPEG.
It was a project that was within the Terra ecosystem. We still go, right?
Oh.
But it was super exciting because it was me, Stan, and one other guy. It was a really fun team of degens. I felt like we understood the ecosystem really well because we had been part of it for so long. And we built this awesome product. We raised money for it. We had finished signing term sheets, and we were ready to launch our project. And the week we were supposed to launch, the week after the DPEG happened. That was pretty devastating, but luckily...
Was that Initia, or was that the predecessor
That was
that
the
eventually
predecessor.
evolved into Initia?
And so luckily, the funds that we did receive were in USDC. Our investors told us, like, hey, we're backing the team. You guys can go build this or something else within any other ecosystem. But I would say that I just didn't understand like the ramifications of what was going to happen to the entire Cosmos ecosystem. Didn't understand the risks of what was going to happen, and then turned out like FTX, Genesis, 3AC, all these different things. And so we returned all the funds back to our investors and just said, we're going to take a beat. We're going to think through what we want to do next. And next time, back us when we build something interesting. And that did happen. We just announced our fundraise, our seed round for Initia. And one of the investors, Nascent, was our lead investor for that previous project.
So it was a Dan Ellis's fund that we were speaking to on the panel at AppChain Day.
Mm-hmm.
They were shilling Initia hard. Did you see that?
No, I wasn't there, but I got some messages.
Yeah. Oh, they were going hard. Yeah. Yeah. They're just like unprovoked. Yeah, so, and that's why Initia is going to be X, Y, and Z. Like, you don't say, huh?
It's value-add investing. And so we spent a few months
ideating, basically kind of looking at like Cosmos in general and just like modular systems as well as just like app chain systems, seeing like what were the largest problems aside from just infra, like user experience as well as just like in general like building products. Kind of came up with a list of like big problems that we kind of wanted to solve, and then we kind of like figured out like why don't we try to build like a system or like a framework that is able to solve a lot of these like large problems that we kind of thought were crucial to these that like we had to solve in order to make like a more usable modular system.
Yeah, I think the fragmentation that you see on Cosmos right now, which is obviously getting better thanks to like people like the Skip team.
For liquidity fragmentation, do you observe that it's orders of magnitude worse in Cosmos than compared to the Rollups ecosystem on the EVM?
No, not at all. I also think the Rollup ecosystem is pretty fractured and fragmented. These are basically the two stacks that we were looking at that existed at the time. Cosmos was cool because you had this shared underlying infra. You could build unique app chains, but there's obviously fragmentation and you have to run out layer ones. You have to bootstrap a validator set. You have to inflate your token supply to pay out to these validators. And that's costly. You also have a ton of peripheral infrastructure you have to run. Things like IBC relays, etc. On the opposite side of the spectrum, the rollup systems within Ethereum, you can launch these rollups extremely easily, clicks of a button, but there's still so much that you have to deal with when it comes to peripheral infrastructure because you don't have the Cosmos SDK underneath. You have to figure out who is going to be your instant bridge provider, who's going to provide liquidity so you can do instant bridging out of these things. Are you ever going to get access to CCTP, to native USDC? Like how do you get Oracle data? What about like cross-chain composability? And obviously you're confined to the ways of the EVM because we're appending this legacy or this new system to a legacy framework. Then we start to see this modularity narrative take away. That was only going to lead to a lot more fragmentation. You now have 4 different DA layers, 10 different interoperability solutions, 5 different execution environments, and these are thousands of unique combinations of chains that are going to be extremely easy to spin up, and this problem is only going to become exacerbated. So we started building Initia, which is essentially solving a lot of these core problems that we saw. It's a network for interwoven rollups is what we like to say, and it's essentially we holistically rebuilt how the architecture, how the product, and how the economics of multi-chain systems should look and feel.
Given the fact that our ecosystem or like our product itself comprises of not only just like the L2 layer, but also like an underlying L1, we're able to do a lot of interesting stuff that like other RAS type services are not able to do. Primarily also like not just on the infrastructure side of things, but like interesting economics. Like how can we encourage all these L2s to like interact with each other? How can we like utilize like the L1 economics as well as like the tokenomics in general to like enforce these L2s to kind of act in a way that is value accretive to not only the L1 users as L1 stakers, but also like the teams that are building on top of these L2s and also the end users of these products. But given the fact that we kind of vertically integrated not only the tech stack but the product stack as well, it gives us like a lot of freedom and like the ability to try different things that you wouldn't be able to see in existing both monolithic chains as well as modular chains.
When you say RAS, Rollups as a service, how are you different or similar to Dimension?
Many of the projects that are in Rollups as a service are, of course, spinning up rollups like the OP stack system or Arbitrum Orbit on Ethereum. Similar to Dimension, we approach this by building a layer 1 that's integrated with these layer 2s. So that this layer 1, in our mind, is really like an orchestration layer. What it does is it arranges and organizes the data that's moving between these layer 2s, as well as provides them with a lot of services. Things like access to other ecosystems, interoperability between the layer 2s, fungibility, Oracle access, fiat on-ramps, native USDC, a lot of the features that you have in Cosmos that are now just given to these layer 2s through our layer 1. I think they're awesome. They're one of the pioneers of this approach. But currently they're using a sovereign rollup system. So they are a fork of Rollkit, which is Celestia's rollup system that they built, which is sovereign rollups. I think Dimension plans to add optimistic abilities in the future through something they've talked about called EIBC. But we do this a little bit differently. We've built a full optimistic rollup framework called the OP-init stack, which is a series of Cosmos SDK modules. One sits on our layer 1, which is the settlement layer, and then this module also sits on every layer 2. And that creates this trustless, optimistic bridge that is between our layer 1 and every layer 2. Additionally, we have multiple different VMs. So every one of these layer 2s on Initia is a full-fledged Cosmos SDK chain. You can change everything about the Cosmos SDK side. You can take something like Osmosis or DYDX-V4 or Hyperliquid and launch those as an initial rollup. But you can also use any of the VMs that we've integrated. So we've rebuilt integrations for Move as well as EVM. And then, of course, on Cosmos, you can use Wasm and CosmWasm on top. But essentially now you can pick whatever smart contracting framework is best for you, change everything about your rollup itself on the Cosmos SDK side, and then out of the box you have all the features that we provide within the system.
This sounds like your layer 1 does the work that Celestia DA does with Cosmos SDK rollup. In eigenlayer speak as like ABS modules, so to speak.
So our L1 basically facilitates roughly two things. So a lot of the messaging between the L2s themselves, the L2s and the L1 itself, as well as it serves as like a liquidity layer. So built in our chain natively, there's a DEX. It basically allows a lot of like the transactions between different chains. Say you have like one token on one of these L2s and have another token on a different L2. Like you're able to route through the L1's DEX itself to like swap these tokens without like having to go to like Ethereum or some other chain like Osmosis. Yeah, so like that's a little bit different. Our L2s themselves actually utilize Celestia's data availability layer. So I think like they're not necessarily like competitors in any sense, but we kind of utilize both.
Yeah, we're relatively Celestia aligned. I mean, Celestia, what they did was they hyper-optimized the data posting layer. And we use that on all of our layer 2s to post this data. They don't facilitate any of like the VMs on top or like the actual chains itself, but they do make it really easy and efficient to post data.
What does the L1 do primarily? Is it more of settlement and orchestration? Those are all the content that goes on the chain?
Essentially settlement, orchestration, as well as liquidity. So one other piece that Stan was mentioning about the DEX is we built something called enshrined liquidity. So on our layer 1, we've changed Cosmos' staking module. It now allows for multiple different denominations to be staked directly with validators. So on our layer 1, we whitelist init X pairs from our DEX, so things like init USDC, init ETH, init Osmo, Initia. And those pairs can be staked directly with validators to secure the network, to act as governance power, as well as to earn rewards. But they also act as liquidity that's accessible for every layer 2. So when you are doing those cross-layer 2 swaps, that liquidity is essentially forced to exist as part of the chain security.
Interesting. This is your way of solving the fragmented liquidity problem?
Yeah.
If a development team were to deploy a rollup, they would not necessarily need to solve that problem for themselves and would inherit like the protocol and liquidity.
Right, essentially. And one of the biggest problems within Cosmos is that IBC is pairwise connected. But if you're moving, say, USDC from chain A to chain B and then chain C, and move that same USDC from chain A to C directly, you get two different tokens on chain C. And so this has obviously led to some fractionalization within the Cosmos ecosystem. Is the canonical version of this token the one that comes from osmosis, where all the trading happens, or is it from the actual source chain? And so what this system allows us to do is we use the initial layer 1 as kind of like the source chain for every transfer to a layer 2. So when you're moving from layer 2A to layer 2B, what you're actually doing is sending those tokens to the layer 1, and then from the layer 1 to layer 2B. And this way, you never have these wrap token standards. You just always have the same token that's from the source layer 1 when you're doing those IBC transfers. And so you don't have fractionalization of tokens, you essentially have fungibility of the token everywhere.
Materially, are there any negative implications of having ambiguity over what the source chain is?
The reason we kind of removed this, and this is like, it follows similar structure to like how Noble issues USDC and like how native USDC now moves within Cosmos, is that like if you have USDC on one chain, let's say in Osmosis, and then you want to move it to like another chain, it has to always pass through the Noble chain itself. And this is the reason they do this is so that you don't get these weird wrap standards. So in some sense, we kind of adopt this model. We don't apply it to just USDC, but we apply it to like all the tokens that live within like this initial ecosystem. Basically to get rid of like this whole like routing, weird like pathwise dependency between moving different chains.
Specifically in the proof of stake context, I was wondering if there were any existential risks that this poses. Economically, when you look at like non-fungible tokens, it is kind of solved by like arbitraging the pairs between like the bridged chain or like the synthetic token and then the native token. Do you see any problems with that if it were done in a, let's just say, decentralized manner, not based on like a BitGo model?
You could rely on like decentralized actors or like third-party actors to arbitrage some of this difference away. But in general, I think it's just like a poor like product UX and like user experience.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think like that's one of the biggest reasons why we actually like kind of enforce this. Like you don't want the case of like, for example, in Arbitrum when they first launched, right, there was not native USDC and like USDC.E was the main pair. Like,
right, and similar to like just because it's a roll up on the Ethereum main chain doesn't mean that it has like exactly identical UX as like bridging over to Avalanche, and then you get like USD.E.
Yeah, it's like right now in Cosmos land we have Axler USDC and we have Noble USDC, and some protocols take both, some take one, some take the other. Well, if we adopt this philosophy in initial land, every rollup only needs to think about one token for each type of token. There's only one USDC that's going to go around.
That is true for Initia, but what happens when they want to move the tokens out and let's say onto a different app chain?
Sure. So if you're moving from USDC from one initial layer 2 to say Osmosis, there would be an IBC transfer from the layer 2 to the initial layer 1. It would then go from the layer 1 to Noble, as Noble requires it to go through Noble, and then from Noble to Osmosis. And then if you were doing something like Ethereum, what would happen was the ETH would come from ETH to the initial layer 1, and then anywhere within the initial layer 2 systems, and then the same thing in the reverse, that it will always go through the layer 1.
Very aligned to the hub and spoke model of like multi-leg transfers.
I think a lot of people used to think that this is what Atom Hub
that's what Atom Hub was supposed to do, yeah.
And so yeah, that's why I think in a way we're kind of rebuilding Cosmos itself, but in a much lighter way. You're able to spin up these full Cosmos SDK chains with a click of a button, and then you can focus on building your dApp, and a lot of those infrastructure problems and what exists within Cosmos now is somewhat solved.
You're like building a little miniature Cosmos ecosystem from the original vision of the white paper within the Cosmos network.
Yeah.
I think like the biggest thing is that we're obviously like pretty big believers in like the app chain thesis, like in general, like the philosophy of like how this worldview should happen. We just think like it was done poorly in the sense that like it created more fractionalization than like the fractionalization I was trying to solve, right? Whether it's like liquidity or like whichever other type of communication process. And we kind of looked at this philosophy of like, yeah, this is like roughly how we imagine the world to be in the future. Let's rebuild the system in a way that's a little bit more, not only like economically sustainable or like economically have some sort of economic value, but also like improve the user experience while we're at it.
So UX, I think, is one of the main things that we've been trying to optimize for. Aside from this architecture stack rebuild, We've also thought a lot about both economics, but also the UX. How should these multi-chain networks look and feel from a user's perspective in the end game? Ultimately, I think we're trying to reach a level of chain abstraction where you can have thousands of layer 2s, and as a user, you don't even know that you're using various individual networks. You're just using different applications, you're moving your assets between them, you're not thinking about explicitly bridging these tokens. And so we've done a lot of work both on the Initia app, which is kind of your home ground for all things on the layer 1, our Explorer system that is pretty kick-ass, that comes out of the box in every one of these layer 2s, as well as some of these product features for moving between these rollups and connecting to various wallets, because essentially these layer 2s should not have any barriers to entry. We want liquidity to flow pretty easily, and we want users to flow between them. How can we minimize that friction? One of the first things we did was we built a wallet widget, and this allows you to connect any EVM wallet or any Cosmos wallet, as well as in-app wallets, directly to any layer 2 on Initia, despite it being an EVM, MoveVM, or WASM VM. Essentially, you don't have to download a new app, right? Which is a huge thing. When you go to Aptos or Sui, you have to go download a new app, or a new wallet. When you go to Cosmos, typically you need Kepler or Leap. You go to Solana, you need another one. When you go to Ethereum, you need another one. And we've just built this wallet widget, enabled these types of signings, so you can use whatever you want. And I think that'll help with a lot of friction. And then the second one was a bridge widget that essentially aggregates all the flows through Cosmos land as well as Ethereum land. So if you're bringing assets in, whether that's from an existing initial rollup or from an external ecosystem, you're just thinking about I'm depositing onto this layer 2, rather than telling your users, hey, bridge to the initial layer 1 through the portal front end, then go to this bridge page and bridge to our layer 2. It's all just kind of abstracted away, so now you just use this widget when you think about sending between dApps.
You kind of alluded to your broader vision, so if you could speak to that and where you see Initia in the coming years and where it fits into the broader crypto ecosystem.
Yeah, I think like the product goal in some sense, or like the user experience goal in some sense, is kind of like to emulate the ecosystem of like the iOS or like Apple ecosystem, in the sense that like all these different types of products, which will live on different L2s or Initias themselves, they should be like highly interoperable when you're moving your assets or like moving your users between different types of applications.
You were talking about the Initia chain being analogous to the iOS App Store.
Yeah, so like we kind of want to emulate like that user experience or like the developer experience as well. Each application that's built, whether it's within the App Store or within like Web3 itself, they all live on like different separate spaces. They're built by different teams, right? Like they have different backgrounds. Like the product itself is like completely different. It might be like a banking app or like a game app or whatever. But in the end, basically the user experience is roughly the same, right? Like you're easily able to switch between different apps. You don't really feel like there's like a huge difference between moving between these two different apps themselves. Some of the user experience itself is shared as well. So for example, if you make like an in-app purchase in a game or like some other purchase in some other type of app, right? Like there's that like Apple pop-up that says like, sign in, basically use your Face ID and then like confirm the payment itself. Like that experience is all shared across these applications. And that's what we're kind of trying to do at Initia as well. Have like this underlying layer that has like a shared experience for all these L2s themselves, while making it super easy for like these L2 applications to build whatever applications that they want to build.
Do you remember in 2015, that was what Ethereum came out with? They're like, oh, we're going to be the app store for crypto. And they hit critical mass and then started to fumble because of their own success. Do you think that that's something that you've anticipated?
Yeah, I guess like the specific like architectural decisions with building like a modular ecosystem or like a modular product, I think like that's targeted towards solving some of these initial problems that you kind of eventually see from like successful L1s, like throttling, like congestion in general. A lot of that stuff is removed by separating like basically the tech stack itself.
I think a lot of these things can change over time though. One of the advantages of ownership of this entire system is that we own the L1 system, the layer 2 system, like the interoperability framework, and we can change those as there's new innovations. Like if shared sequencing does turn out to be incredibly useful, like that's something that we can just swap in. I'm not totally sold on shared sequencing just yet, but without so many cooks in the kitchen, It makes it a lot easier to chef up a good dish. Yeah.
Speaking of shared sequencing, you mentioned that each rollup is going to be a Cosmos SDK rollup. I assume that would have staking out of the box. In that sense, you wouldn't need to worry about shared sequencing, would you? Or am I understanding the architecture incorrectly?
No, so every layer 2 can either use a centralized sequencer or a decentralized set of sequencers. So you can think about it as like one validator or multiple validators. We use common BFT underneath. They can choose to have stake on them if they want in their own native tokens, or they can use a multi-sig style approach as well. Most of the security comes through the optimistic rollup itself. But with that, you can have all sorts of security trade-offs, and then each of them has IBC out of the box despite what VM they're using. And that's how we can do cross-chain composability. It's obviously asynchronous, but it's been working pretty good within Cosmos Labs so far.
Did you solve fraud proofs? Do you have that?
We do have fraud proofs, and we have rollbacks.
Chain rollbacks?
Well, in most optimistic rollbacks, what happens in a rollback is that the state output root is deleted, so the chain doesn't roll itself back, but the state doesn't change. I wouldn't say I am the architecture man who can explain that right now.
Like the last state is removed, and then basically the state that was seen to be like false or like whatever is now no longer part, and then it goes back to like the most recent state that is not that state. Yeah, so we kind of do the same thing on Initia itself, and that's like how we support basically this fraud proofs as well as like rollbacks.
What's nice about having a roll-up system that's vertical scaling instead of horizontal scaling is that it's much more efficient. You can assume that these optimistic rollups are working fine until there is a fraud proof challenge. Then you can tap into additional actors to help solve this. But things like ICS, which exist in Cosmos right now, are quite unscalable. Every new chain that the hub validates, their validator set has to run full nodes of every one of those chains. And after you reach about like 10 or so, it becomes pretty unfeasible. A lot of people like to say that this is a feature and not a bug because you have to selectively choose which 10 those can be, but I don't think unscalability is a feature.
No, absolutely not. We're supposed to be progressing from unscalable to scalable infrastructure. That's implied that Initia can scale to
hopefully thousands of rollups.
Thousands?
That's the dream.
It is the dream. Building Cosmos early days, we were like, the world is going to have thousands of actions. All secured by shared security.
We have how many right now? Hundreds?
Hundreds?
I feel like there's at least 100.
It's close. It's at least close to the hundreds, and I'm sure we'll definitely cross that threshold after this bull market is done, for sure.
This bull market is done, so we're fully in.
We're starting. We're starting.
Okay, we're just starting.
It's just starting.
Good.
After it's done, as in like after October of next year.
Only 1 year.
1 year.
1.5 years.
That's how long it took. Yeah, I remember in 2020, it was kind of like kickstarting slowly, and then 2021, Wall Street bets happened, Robinhood happened, and then it was just like boom. I mean, it was kind of like a camel hump. It was like peaked in July and then like really peaked in December.
Do you think this is a super cycle, or is
No,
this just a new cycle in
The
general?
super cycle thing that Suzu was trying to mean, like I think it was misguided. Like I think it was like too lofty. Because he was like definitely drinking the Kool-Aid as well as his own Kool-Aid. The cycle will, in terms of orders of magnitude and like size, it's going to be bigger. But in terms of timing, definitely like it's not breaking out of the cyclical nature of the last few cycles. But that being said, I think this is the one last cycle that we're going to have before we have our version of the .com bubble burst. It's going to be the blockchain bubble burst of 25.
It's over.
Or like, I think
it's over.
Actually, at 26, it'll really like start unwinding. And it'll peak in 25 and then unwind.
Okay.
It's been
We'll
like
come back to this and see how accurate.
Okay, yeah.
Okay.
No, peak end of 2025, 2026. An interesting tidbit, and this is like a little woo-woo for probably everyone who's listening. The Luna DPEG happened on the day of a blood moon. You know when the next blood moon is?
When?
March 2025.
Oh.
So it's going to be like
not
boom.
financial advice.
NFA. If you want astrological price predictions, go to what's her name?
Marin.
Sub to Marin.
It's not financial advice.
Yeah, well, you guys knew her name before I even did. Yeah, I don't actually
I wonder why.
No wonder your portfolio is only down.
So I'm a builder.
Are there things that people should be aware of if they're looking for alpha or ways to farm, points generation, etc.?
I guess stay tuned for public testnet. We'll definitely have lots of interesting things to do there. I think it will be fun in the sense that we'll be launching public testnet with some of our partner projects as well. So on day one on public testnet, there will be projects and things that you can actually do, try out. That will also launch during mainnet. And in doing so, I think you'll be able to figure out exactly our vision, the vision of the initial platform itself, the tech stack, why the system works, and then specifically some of the economic mechanisms that Zon mentioned a little bit earlier.
It's definitely interesting. Glad you guys are experimenting with that.
Yeah, there's a lot of moving parts. I think even when we talk to some of our supporters and backers and investors as well, there's so many things that are going on in a modular ecosystem and a modular project itself. It's a little bit difficult to understand in some sense. So hopefully we'll be able to simplify a lot of this process itself through tutorials as well as some of the stuff that we'll be doing during public testnet.
Within the Initia ecosystem, the Initia main chain with the token is the federal government almost, with local and roll-up jurisdictions.
Yeah, we've thought pretty thoroughly about the Fed analogy, but we just don't want to call ourselves the Fed chain.
Sure.
The way we view a lot of layer 2 ecosystems right now is more so like the EU. You have these loosely connected networks. They're all on Ethereum. They don't really care about each other that much. They're all ETH-aligned. On Initia, it's a bit more like the US, in a sense that there's this federal government which has a lot of systems and rules. How money flows is similar to how the Fed operates. They control it over the entire US. How movement between networks is similar to how travel is done through the federal government as well. But then you have all of these states that are within there that are these layer 2 applications. They're doing what they want, but to get support from the entire federal government, they have to follow a couple of guidelines.
So when can people anticipate public testnet?
Public testnet should hopefully be coming by the end of April, so soon.
And when mainnet?
Mainnet hopefully in early Q2.
Yeah, so we kind of expect public testnet to last for maybe a month to 2 months, maybe somewhere within that range. Then we'll probably be pretty promptly transitioning to mainnet post testnet. So.
Anything you're specifically looking for validators to support on in public testnet?
We can come validate the layer 1, and then we're still figuring out some of the ideas behind how we want some of these layer 2s to be secured and their relayers, their IBC relayers. We're thinking about potentially using restaked services to do that. And in general, if you're a validator on public testnet, we'll definitely have a program. Anyone can join. It'll fall similarly to the Celestia program, based on things like uptime and community contributions.
So you mentioned something about working with restaking in order to help with relayers. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I guess in general, we're still exploring restaking as a concept overall and how that would potentially fit with Initia. So we've been talking with a few other teams. Eigenlayer, all layer, etc. Still kind of early stages with regards to if there's anything that will happen. But yeah, in general, some of these relayers or some of these other things that could potentially use some of these restaking mechanisms, we've been exploring it internally. Yeah, nothing finalized as of now.
One way you could potentially solve liquidity fragmentation in Cosmos is to build the restaking version of Eigenlayer. Essentially, if you supported every single Cosmos token and incentivized it such that anyone who restakes on this platform gets to farm it, you are basically going to concentrate most of the liquidity throughout Cosmos, which at the peak of 2021 was $80 billion, something very significant, and reconcentrate that. Provided that you do it safely such that you don't create an existential threat to the underlying chain.
Restaking is pretty interesting. I'm excited to see what happens when Eigenlayer launches. Mm-hmm. You have how many billions in there now?
I think the last I checked was 7.7 billion. The thing with Eigenlayer is Ethereum projects are so overvalued because Eigenlayer is essentially, in Cosmos we have ICS working right now. It's just not as much liquidity as Ethereum liquidity. And just because people stake ETH on Eigenlayer doesn't necessarily mean that their ABS modules and that kind of functionality that they set out to do actually works. And yet the lower bound of value is based on how much TVL they have restaked there, which is kind of crazy.
In general, there's like still a lot of things to do with regards to restaking, whether that's like through eigenlayer or through some other Cosmos mechanism. I know there's some like Cosmos team itself that's doing something related to eigenlayer. Maybe they're working with eigenlayer.
Ethos.
Yeah, ethos, I guess. I don't think we've spent enough time internally to actually like look at a lot of these projects and like how we could do something with restaking as of now. But maybe there will be something to do in the future. Get ready for testnet.
Yeah, come play with public testnet. It's gonna be kick-ass.
I will be there.
Me too.
Thanks, guys.